The Jets are coming off a disappointing 2022 season and are looking to be a Super Bowl contender in 2023. But heading into this year's draft, there still are questions surrounding Gang Green. Most notably, who will start under center? But how will the Jets improve their team via the draft? Joining me to answer those questions and more is Jets pre- and post-game analyst Connor Rogers. He's also an NFL draft analyst for NBC Sports. Connor joins me now. Connor, how are you doing? Have you talked enough about Aaron Rodgers and the Jets this offseason?
I don't think so. I think until this trade is done, there's just still so much more to say, but definitely running out of words, and it's great that we get to pivot to the draft here.
Yeah, we were pivoting to the draft, but I'm sure Aaron Rodgers' name will still come up while we talk here. It's going to happen for sure. But Connor, it's been a multi-year process for GM Joe Douglas to rebuild this offensive line. In his first two drafts, he selected Mekhi Becton, Elijah Vera Tucker in the first rounds. He also signed veterans Dwayne Brown and Laken Tomlinson last offseason. However, there still are multiple question marks on this offensive line, despite investing so heavily on this position group through both the draft and free agency. So, is it clear offensive line specifically, tackle and center are the biggest needs for the Jets in this draft? And do you think they will take a lineman at 13?
I would think so. I mean, we can get into some of the secondary needs later, whether that's interior defensive line. They always look at edge pass rush when you look at the type of defense that Robert Saleh runs. But you have to start with the offensive line, and you start with tackle because those are the guys that go in the top 15, right? Centers traditionally do not, even the great ones, like we saw with Tyler Linderbaum last year. So the Jets are in a unique situation that they've put a lot of resources into rebuilding this offensive line, like you said. Some have worked out, some have not. And they are coming back from an injury-riddled season last year. You have Dwayne Brown, who will be playing at 38 years old next year, expected to start at left tackle. Laken Tomlinson really struggled after being a free agent signing at left guard, but he will be back in that left guard spot. They don't have a center right now. They've been talking to a player like Ben Jones, but even if they made that signing, I still think they look at the draft. AVT back at a spot at right guard. Max Mitchell and Mekhi Becton expected to battle it out at right tackle. And you always draft in 2 to 3 year windows, especially at premium positions, which tells you at pick 13, they have to have their eyes on a tackle, whether that's Paris Johnson from Ohio State. He started at right guard in 2021. He started at left tackle last season. He's got all the traits you look for in a franchise left tackle. Arms down to the ground, great feet, great movement skills at his size. His power is still a work in progress, but it has gotten a lot better throughout his time for a young player at Ohio State. Broderick Jones from Georgia, one-year starter in the SEC. Played at a really high level of that 1 year starting. Great athlete, doesn't carry any bad weight. Exceptional in the zone running game, getting to his spots. Technique and handwork, still a little bit of work in progress, but that's expected from a 1 year starter at the college level. Those guys are in play at 13. I wouldn't rule out Darnell Wright from Tennessee. He's somebody that Tennessee moved around at left tackle, right tackle. He settled in nicely this year at right tackle. A big hulking player, over 330 pounds. When he gets his hands on you, it's over. You're going into the ground. His feet, not as good as the other two guys, but when you play with that level of power, sometimes it doesn't matter. So the Jets have to look at the situation and go, what do we need? Do we need a prototypical left tackle? Then you look at Paris Johnson and Broderick Jones if they were there. Are we okay with a guy that'll probably stay on the right side and move Becton back to the left side to compete with Dwayne Brown this year? That's the big question the Jets have to have in that spot. But I think most importantly, we know their eyes have to be on one of the big tackles at 13. And we didn't get into Peter Skoronski because I don't think he'll be there. A lot of teams project him as a guard, but he's such a good player, a top 6 player in this draft for me, that if he fell to 13, I think the Jets would have to take him.
Okay, so we think their focus at 13 will be on the offensive line, one of their biggest areas of needs. But before we get into some other stuff, what are the Jets' other focus? What are the other big areas of needs for them as they head into this 2023 draft?
Yeah, well, like we said, they need a starting center, but typically you find your starting center on day 2 or day 3 of the draft, and I don't think John Michael Schmitz will make it all the way to their picks at 42 and 43. Maybe he does, and it's remained to be seen if one of those picks will be included in a trade for Aaron Rodgers. Joe Tippmann, Luke Whippler, a lot of these centers from the Big Ten that have played at a high level and would really fit into what they want to do offensively. So center in round 2, everybody has their eyes on that for them. And then you also look at, they haven't really figured out interior defensive line next to Quinnen Williams yet. They did sign Quentin Jefferson, more of a pass rush rotational player. They need somebody that could 2-gap, hold the fort against the run. So interior defensive line is on the table. Pass rush is so interesting on the edge to me. They got Jermaine Johnson, the first rounder from last year, who will handle a bigger role this year. But you look at the contracts. Carl Lawson is up after this year. Bryce Huff will play on a one-year tender. If both those guys leave free agency after next year, you can't run Robert Saleh's offense without edge pass rush. Just Jermaine Johnson wouldn't be enough. They've had B.J. Ojulari in for a visit from LSU, a stand-up speed rusher. Are they looking in that mold and saying, we'll rotate a pass rusher in year one, and then year two, our future is Jermaine Johnson on one side, the player we drafted in the 2023 draft on the other? I know Robert Saleh loves to bang the table to get guys that can get after the quarterback, whether it's in free agency, whether it's in the draft, at the top of the draft, whether it's on waiver claims. It's a priority for their defense and something that I think will continue in this year's draft.
All right, we'll see how things continue with that in terms of the Jets' needs. And all right, I told you, we're going to talk about Aaron Rodgers in some way. Here we go, Connor. It's clear. All things point to Aaron Rodgers being traded to the Jets. It's just a matter of when that deal goes through. So one of the things the Jets clearly focused on was adding more talent into the wide receiver room for Rodgers. They signed Allen Lazard from the Packers on a 4-year, $44 million deal, and McCole Hartman from the Chiefs on a 1-year, $4.5 million deal. They also dealt former second-round pick Elijah Moore to the Cleveland Browns and released Braxton Berrios. Could we still see the Jets add more talent and draft a wideout here to help Aaron Rodgers, who we expect to come?
It's a yes and no for me, right? Because I think they wait so long that I don't know if this wide receiver will have to play significant snaps in 2023 when Rodgers is here. And we don't know how long Rodgers will be here, if at all, after that. And when you look at a lot of the different types of wide receivers the Jets have been closely scouting throughout this process, they project as day three players, whether that's a guy like Andre Yosevas from Princeton, a Princeton track athlete. He's got size at 6'3". He got his weight over 210 pounds. He's a burner that can win down the field. So I think when you look at the Jets, they like the day three depth of the wide receiver class, and the Jets draft speed. It hasn't always worked out for them, but it's been hit or miss, but the hits have been huge. It didn't work out with Denzel Mims. Elijah Moore, we know his problems here, but Garrett Wilson is a guy that ran in the 4.3s and just won Offensive Rookie of the Year. I think the Jets will continue that mold of drafting guys that are sub 4.4 wide receivers. So day three of the draft would not shock me at all if they add another young body to that room that can win vertically, especially when Aaron Rodgers is in town. We know he loves to push the ball down the field.
Okay. Speaking of Rodgers, again, see, we're still talking more about Aaron Rodgers if and when he becomes a Jet. Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle are the only other QBs on the roster. Do you feel confident that the Jets will stand pat with that QB room, or could they look to take a swing on a QB in the later rounds of this draft?
They could take a swing. I don't know how much of an answer that would be right away as Rodgers backup. I believe they've had a visit with Aiden O'Connell, who's an interesting depth quarterback in this draft, but when you look at it from across the board, these guys are going to go early, right? Obviously, the first round is going to be littered with Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, maybe Hendon Hooker. I don't think they'd look on day two to take a Tanner McKee level player. So do they look at day three and use a pick on it? Aiden O'Connell or a Jake Haener from Fresno State. A lot of the quarterbacks that were in the senior all-star circuit at the Senior Bowl, at the Shrine Game, I wouldn't be shocked to see they take that dart throw, they get another body, another camp arm to try to develop into a long-term number two. But I don't think it's a priority for them, which is very odd to me. We know Joe Douglas has really held on to hope for draft picks in the past. They didn't cut ties with Denzel Mims very early, or Braden Mann, or Ashton Davis. And they don't appear willing to do that with Zach Wilson right now. So oddly enough, it feels like this is the Jets quarterback room as it stands. I don't think they'll take one before the fifth round of this draft.
Okay, not seeing the Jets taking a QB that early. Let's talk a little defense before we wrap up here. When you look at the defense, specifically up the middle, the Jets seem to have lost some of the depth that they had at defensive tackle after Sheldon Rankings and Nathan Shepard both left in free agency. Then you look at the linebacker position, C.J. Mosley and Quincy Williams at linebacker. They're the only proven veterans on the roster currently. Could you see the Jets address both positions, and what players could you see Gang Green targeting?
I think so. Now, this is where the depth of the class can start to help you, right? You look at the interior defensive line. The top players like Jalen Carter are going to be gone, we think. At 13, it's going to be interesting if Carter makes it there, how much they like a player like Kalijah Cansey from Pittsburgh, who is just a phenomenal pass rushing interior defensive lineman that does fit their scheme. He reminds me of Sheldon Rankins a lot, to be honest with you, coming out. I think he'd be even better, but I don't know if they'll use a priority pick like that on the interior defensive line. Maybe they look down the board at depth, whether it's a player like Kobe Turner from Wake Forest, who was a transfer and just has phenomenal tape, another Shrine Game guy. Byron Young from Alabama, pro-ready hands, can stack and shed, can win, can hold those stalemates against double teams as well. And then you look at linebacker. A lot of the day three linebackers fit the run and chase mold they like in this defense, whether it's Dorian Williams from Tulane, great coverage player, made plays on the ball, can run down the field against wheel routes against running backs. Dion Henley is another run and chase kind of linebacker that he might be gone before they pick on day 3. He might sneak into day 2, but there's just all these different athletic linebackers. And Robert Saleh has a bit of a history of drafting or waiting on linebacker and drafting and developing them. You go all the way back to his time in Jacksonville with Miles Jack, Fred Warner with the 49ers. It's a position that he feels very, very confident in scouting, and the Jets can wait and see what they get to replace Quan Alexander with a later pick of this draft at that position.
Connor, do you think it's likely, from everything I've heard you say and analyzing what the Jets could or may not do in this draft, do you think it's likely with that pick at 13 that they go for offensive line help? Is that what Jets fans should expect here?
I think so. Number one, it fits in the DNA of Joe Douglas. It fits in the DNA of going after a quarterback that's approaching 40 that did get banged up last year. I believe he played with a broken thumb. You need to protect him, and you need multiple lines of defense. We've seen them go out and get depth in the offensive line class in free agency, especially when you look at a guy like Wes Schweitzer from Washington who could play guard and center. And now you need to go get, obviously a starting center in the draft or in free agency with Ben Jones. You need to go get a tackle for the future because Dwayne Brown played with that hurt shoulder last year, and older injured players, that trend kind of doesn't go the right way for them. So at 13, it might seem boring, but it feels like the draft a couple years ago when they were picking right outside the top 10, and everybody wondered, will one of the big 4 tackles make it to them? And 2 of them made it, Mekhi Becton and Tristan Wirfs. Everybody has the same question with the Jets this year. Skoronski, Paris Johnson, Roderick Jones, Darnell Wright. Will somebody be there for the Jets to take at 13? Ultimately, I think one of them will be, and I think the Jets turn in that card.
All right, we will see what the Jets do coming up in the NFL draft.